Welcome to the respiratory system. In this lesson, by the end of it, you should be able to identify the location of the lungs, describe their function and their structure, as well as being able to identify the main muscles involved in breathing. And you should also be able to describe the passage of air through the respiratory tract and also be able to describe the process of what we call gaseous exchange or diffusion. So let's start with the function. So the function of the respiratory system is to take in air and remove carbon dioxide. So within the air that we breathe in 79% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and less than 1% of carbon dioxide. Yet if you look at what we breathe out, we also breathe out 79% nitrogen. So what that suggests is that as humans, our bodies don't utilize nitrogen. We don't need it. So the body will just naturally breathe it back out. But if we look at the difference in oxygen now, so we breathe in 21% but breathe out 17%. So again, what that suggests is that we only use 4% oxygen. The rest of it just gets breathed out. But looking below now, we breathe out 4% carbon dioxide, yet we breathe in less than 1%. What's actually occurring is that 4% oxygen that we do breathe in, once that's been utilized by the body, it's converted into carbon dioxide, which is why we breathe out more carbon dioxide than what we breathe in. So let's look at the location. The locations of your lungs are in the rib cage, but it's what we call the thoracic cavity. So thoracic just refers to the upper back portion of your spine, and the cavity is the chamber that the lungs sit within. And again, just to quickly recap, your function is to take in oxygen and remove carbon dioxide. But it's key to note that the technical name for the location of the lungs is your thoracic cavity, as that's the term that will often be described in a question in your theory exams. So, some of the main muscles that are involved within breathing. So we have the diaphragm being one of the first ones. So as we breathe in, the diaphragm will descend to draw air into the lungs. If you look over onto the image on the right, you will also notice there's something called the intercostal muscles. So this is the muscles now that sit between the ribs and contract to pull the ribs out to basically expand that rib cage to allow for the lungs to inflate. So staying on the theme of that diaphragm, you can see from this image here, so we've got kind of your baseline, so your resting diaphragm the whole way across. As we breathe in, the diaphragm will pull down to allow for the lungs to inflate. As we breathe out, the diaphragm will now push back up to push that air out of the lungs. So let's look at some of the anatomy now. So we're going to pull all of these up first. So when we breathe in, you're either going to breathe in through your nose or your mouth. So that's going to be the first place that air is going to enter the body. At which point, it's going to go through the pharynx, where it's basically going to enter the back of the throat, down into the larynx, which is also known as your voice box. It's then going to go down a pipe called the trachea. The trachea is the main windpipe that's going to take you all the way down to the lungs, which you can also see on this image over here to the right. After your trachea, it's going to go into either the left or the right bronchus. Most of the time it will enter through both. And these are the two main branches into your left and your right lung. Once it's gone into the bronchus, it will then go into what we call the bronchioles. So these little twig-like shapes coming off of the bronchus now, where eventually it's going to reach the alveoli. So the way I want you to try and envision this is if you turned that image upside down, it's going to look like a tree. And in fact, the human anatomy works the complete polar opposite to a tree. So think a tree is upright, whereas you look at our lungs, they're the complete opposite. They're actually upside down. And yet the job of the human body is to take in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide. A tree will do the opposite. It will breathe in carbon dioxide and push out oxygen. So they're actually complete opposites to each other. So think of the trachea as the main trunk of the tree. The bronchus is the two main kind of stems coming off of the tree. So like your branches. The bronchioles are the twigs, and then the alveoli are the leaves that sit on the end of those twigs. And you'll notice if you look at that alveoli, it's surrounded by capillaries. And we're going to go into more detail about those capillaries on this next slide. So we just spoke about those capillaries, and they were surrounded by the alveoli, and they are surrounded by capillaries. The reason for that is, if you remember back to the previous lecture we did, we spoke about capillaries being like a roadmap. So they work a bit like a tea bag, in the sense that the moment you put a tea bag into water, diffusion happens. So all of a sudden the tea can seep through the walls of the tea bag. If your tea bag is just dry, you can shake it, though the tea leaves inside are not going to escape. It's exactly the same here. So once we've taken a breath in, so if you'll just take a big breath in now, what's happening is we're drawing oxygen into the lungs. It's going to travel down that whole route, so from the bronchus into the bronchioles, where it reaches the alveoli. Once that oxygen is at the alveoli, it works like a tea bag. So the oxygen is going to diffuse into those capillaries, where it now enters the bloodstream. And that process is called either gaseous exchange, which is the exchange of two gases. So oxygen going in, carbon dioxide coming out. And the process of it seeping through is called diffusion. So here in front of you, this is an alveoli. What is waiting the other side of that in those capillaries are your red blood cells. And again, if you remember back to the previous lecture, I referred to them almost like taxis or Ubers. So you've got a little taxi rank here of red blood cells in those capillaries waiting for that oxygen. But also, they're there getting rid of carbon dioxide. So let's just say now, so these blue ones are your carbon dioxide. They're basically depleted. They're ready to leave. So they've had a night out, they're done, they've jumped in their cab, they're ready to go home. So what they do now is they leave the taxi and they're on their way back out of the body. But those ready to still kind of go out and party is your oxygen over here. So they now jump up, they jump in their little taxis, and the red blood cells will take them around the body to deliver that oxygen to where they need to go. Again, once they've depleted, through that circulation process, blood will come all the way back up, where they go back to the start of this taxi rank, now as carbon dioxide, because they've been used, ready to leave the body. And that whole process is called gaseous exchange. So this is just a slightly more anatomical image of what it's going to look like. So you can see your alveoli there. You've got your bronchiole, which is your twig, which is then linked onto your alveoli, which is surrounded by capillaries. Again, it's just exactly the same animation there. So what I would suggest is take a screen grab of this, maybe write this whole process out to remember it better. But what you're looking at here is the journey of air, but combining the two lectures from today. So we're looking at the whole process from when we breathe in to then looking at the circulatory process of how that blood goes around the body, what structures the heart is going to go through, all the way back to us breathing it back out of the body. So if you want to take a screen grab of this one, it may help when it comes to your revision. Okay. Looking at the cardiovascular and the respiratory system links. So the cardiovascular and the respiratory system both work towards the same goal. So their whole purpose is to get oxygen into the blood, circulate that oxygen around the body, bring the carbon dioxide back where we're going to breathe it out. And as we know, when the heart receives blood, it's going to push that oxygen around the body by contracting, but also by that suction effect, bringing blood back to the heart, which will be full of carbon dioxide that we're going to go and get rid of. So a quick recap here on the respiratory muscles is your diaphragm, but you've also got those intercostal muscles as well. But a couple of other ones to consider, and they're more kind of secondary muscles, but you've got your internal and your external obliques will also play a role in breathing. So you've got the external obliques, which pull the ribs upwards and outwards for that expansion. And then the internal obliques will pull the ribs downwards and inwards when we breathe out. And that is your respiratory system.